Everyone, and welcome to Old News, where the fossils are old but discoveries are new. My name is Laura Beth Spear. I am your host, so I'll be keeping an eye on our chat and making sure we don't miss any questions, comments, etc. And of course, here to share his expertise is our Dr. Christian Kammerer, the museum's research curator of paleontology.
Hi there, Laura Beth.
Hi, Christian. Hey, how are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I am good. I'm super excited to learn about what cats were doing before the internet existed.
Before they were memes.
Yeah, exactly. The original meme.
Yeah, we're gonna be having a good time talking about some pretty iconic fossil mammals in the cat family today. Certainly one of my faves.
You haven't guessed it from the name. Saber-toothed cats.
Indeed. Yeah, there's some new research out on saber-teeth, uh, that I think folks will find very interesting. Um, Talking about some of their growth, some of their life history, even potentially some of their family structure.
I'm so excited.
All right, well,
Get into it.
let's get down to it. Let me bring up this some of these slides here. So just to situate ourselves, already know that we're talking about mammals. So these are not particularly ancient, or at least not sort of Paleozoic or anything. But just our geological chart. The top is the modern age, is when we live, and the further down you go, the further back in time you are. And we're going to be talking about an animal living in the Pleistocene epoch, which is one of the most recent things we've ever talked about on this show. So these are the recent time is called the Holocene, and really only goes back 10,000 or so years. Um, um, of course, the Pleistocene was not entirely, ice all the time. It also had these interglacial periods, and this sort of waxing and waning of the ice sheets was related to what are called Milankovitch cycles, which is sort of slight changes in the Earth's rotation that result in changes to the climate. So not like the climate change we're seeing today, which is driven by human activity. Um, but during the Pleistocene, there were huge diversity of what are generally called the megafauna, which are enormous mammals and to a lesser extent birds, of which the most iconic are those that were living uh, near these glaciated areas. So the woolly mammoth, probably the most famous of all of these, but also things like woolly rhinos, giant elk, giant bison, cave bears, things of that nature, living in the tundra-like habitats adjacent to some of these glaciers. So this animal's not living on, for the most part, on top of the ice sheets themselves, but nearby in sort of these perpetually cold habitats. However, that is not sort of the only type of megafauna that was alive at the time. So as you can see on the map there are large sections of the Earth that were not encased in ice. You have whole continents like Australia and Africa that did not have substantial ice coverage. And those things are, you have, in addition to mammoths and mastodons, you have all the like giant ground sloths and giant armadillos, as well as some giant birds. The ones shown here are these teratorns, which are huge birds of prey or possibly scavenging birds present in the Pleistocene. And then, of course, some of these iconic carnivorans, of which the best known has to be the saber-toothed tiger, Smilodon, also called the saber-toothed cat, because it's not actually a tiger. of the living tiger species. This whole group of saber-toothed cats, of which Smilodon is perhaps the most extreme member, are only distant relatives of the modern big cats. So they diverged millions of years ago, before the modern sort of large cat genus Panthera had evolved. So Smilodon, well-known prehistoric taxon, present in basically a lot of localities throughout North and South America. It was quite a widespread genus. One of the more, well, not particularly common in its individual habitats, but certainly one of the more successful of the big carnivorous megafauna. Best known, of course, for those canines. So these giant saber-like teeth, which are the source of the animal's name. So Smilodon is from the ancient Greek. It means knife tooth, and seems a pretty apt comparison there. So just ridiculously long teeth that you can see extend well below the lower jaw. The function of which is still somewhat debatable. So scientists are still arguing over and trying to figure out exactly how Smilodon was using those incredible teeth. There has been a lot of work towards that end, especially in the context that Smilodon was not the only giant tooth predator in fossil history. There's a whole wide array of saber-toothed carnivores through time, some of which are not even mammals. So you have things like one of these Gorgonopsian therapsids. These are proto-mammals, all the way on the left there. But then also this group of nimravids, which are very distant relatives of most of the modern carnivores. Cats, within sort of the cat family Felidae, you have multiple, basically quasi-independent cases where the canines have become hypertrophied, which just means that they've become very, very enlarged. But Smilodon is the most extreme case. And these are some work that's been done. This is a paper by Lautenschlager et al. That came out last year, looking at sort of the function of saber-tooth bites and skull and jaw construction. And they were eating in somewhat different ways. So we don't know exactly how Smilodon was killing or these other animals, but we can say some things about sort of like how wide they could open their mouth, how much force they could put on the bite, how much power was concentrated on the canine versus on sort of these teeth further back in the jaw. Were they able to sort of shear flesh, or were any of them able to crack bone, that sort of thing? And there is a diversity of results from that. So all of these animals weren't doing exactly the same thing. It seems that there could have been several reasons these animals evolved the giant fangs. So it's not all sort of one-to-one. If you have giant canines, you're doing this particular type of feeding. So there has been a lot of work on saber-tooth ecology, but there's still a lot that we have yet to discover. And a lot of it has to do with, we're talking about Smilodon itself, about aspects of its life history as well. So not just sort of what it was eating, how it was hunting, but also how it was growing, sort of what its family structure, if any, was like. Things that we know very well in most modern cats that have been studied in like lion, tiger, even other smaller cat ecology. We do have a bit of a leg up on most fossil animals when it comes to understanding the life history of Smilodon, though, just because of the nature of the fossil record. So the slide I'm showing here is a wall that you can see if you have the chance to go to the Page Museum at the La Brea Tar Pits. So the La Brea Tar Pits, they're in the city of Los Angeles, one of the world's most amazing fossil sites that preserves just thousands and thousands of fossil mammals, birds, and other creatures, even down to insects, preserved in tar. So that slide shows, that's a display showing over 400 skulls of the dire wolf, which is the most common carnivore on the site. There are also many, many specimens of Smilodon, over 2,000 individuals of Smilodon preserved there, as well as other carnivorans like the American lion, Panthera atrox. There's another very large predatory cat known from this site. So the tar pits, they're really spectacular in terms of the number of fossils we have preserved there, which gives us a much better handle on there's a lot more information on how these animals might have been living than a lot of, say, dinosaurs, for instance, where we might only have a single specimen. So the tar pits, they're generally understood that this is a predator trap. So the number of carnivores there is not typical for an ecosystem. Carnivores are usually a relatively small component of ecosystems, at least among mammals, relative to herbivores. If you just think about standard sort of like food chain, generally sort of like a few carnivores at the top, and then much more biomasses in the herbivores. But with thousands and thousands of, really big cats. I mean, Smilodon was a massive animal, equal in size to modern lions and tigers, except much more robust in its build, as well as all of these wolves. And it's really remarkable how many are there. And so the argument is that, herbivores are getting stuck in the tar, and then the carnivores see easy prey of this mired, whether it be a mastodon as shown here, or a ground sloth or something like that, or a bison. They go in to try to eat it, but then they get stuck in the tar too, until all of a sudden you have a bunch of things just sinking down into the asphalt there, becoming preserved. So I do want to say that it's not like a lot of pop culture depictions of tar pits it's just like a lake made of molten tar, and that's really not the case. So the animals would have to be very foolish to just like fall into a lake of tar. Actually, so tar seeps, which are not especially common, but there are generally sort of like petroleum seeps are present all around the world, a lot of them in the ocean. But you also get these situations. This is from another tar seep in California shown here, where it basically just looks like a landscape that you can imagine, oh, I would have no trouble walking over that. Maybe it's a little muddy in some places, but if I've got my boots on, it's fine. But then you get stuck in the tar, especially a lot of times if sort of like the tar that's bubbling up is covered in leaves or grass or something, which as was often the case. So, this mammoth wasn't just like diving into a lake of tar, it was getting stuck in sort of these superficial tar layers. So it really is an amazing record we have from the tar pits for all these animals, but Smilodon, certainly more Smilodon fossils found there than anywhere else. But it has also biased our view of this animal to a large degree, because so much of what we know about Smilodon, the species Smilodon fatalis in particular, is just from the fossils at the tar pits. And one thing that we don't see in the tar pits is saber kittens. So we don't see any really baby Smilodon. They're all, maybe, there's some subadults there. There are things that are not fully grown, but no like newborn Smilodon kittens. And so scientists have known about this for a long time, since detailed, comprehensive cataloging of the La Brea fossils really began. It was clear that there were not really small baby Smilodons there. And there has been the idea that, okay, maybe they are, this is not a site that's good for having babies out there. So the parents they're denning pretty far away from the tar pits. These are just adults that are going out to hunt in this area. And the kids are being, taken care of by their parents back at a den somewhere potentially far away, or at least somewhere that is not, where they're not getting fossilized. And unfortunately, this has made it hard to say too much about sort of the early life history of saber cats. But what is known is actually quite interesting. And there's been a few papers just in the past couple of years looking at what's going on sort of in saber kitten development. So there was a paper a few years ago looking at the tooth eruption in sort of very small Smilodon specimens. So here's one example here. This is a maxilla. How's it from? This is actually a specimen from La Brea, but this is of actually a fairly old juvenile. So what these researchers figured out was that the tooth eruption in Smilodon was very delayed compared to modern cats. So in modern cats, generally the teeth erupt pretty soon, just a few weeks after birth. I need to specify here as well that Smilodon, like all mammals, like ourselves, has two sets of teeth. So they have the baby teeth or the milk teeth, and then those fall out and are replaced with the adult teeth, and those are the only teeth that we have for the rest of our lives, which is typical of mammals, unlike reptiles that are constantly able to replace their teeth. And so for the most part, mammals, the baby teeth are erupting very quickly, or if they're not already erupted by the time the animal is born. For Smilodon, which has these absolutely gigantic canines, it seems that that was a much slower process. And it was actually took many months in order for these teeth to erupt, and actually several years before the adult dentition had fully erupted. And you think about, oh well, I mean, my baby teeth didn't fall out until several years into my life. That makes sense. But that's actually very rare for sort of wild carnivores who generally have quite rapid growth rates. Big cats, they don't live nearly as long as we do. They don't have as slow growth as we do. So this is very unusual for that group. And the other thing about their growth that we've learned is, this is from a paper actually that just came out last Friday. So this is, we know that their teeth grew relatively slowly, but then this is new evidence that their skeleton was actually growing quite rapidly. So this is a very interesting set of fossils from a site in Ecuador, in Corralito. This is not a tar pit style locality. This is actually a sort of a nearshore marine locality where these fossils were probably washed into the water. But it's 56 bones sort of scattered, broken up, but they're all very similar in size except for one big elbow bone, the ulna. So there's two size classes represented, and among the bones that are all the same size, there are two left jaws. So we know there are at least two individuals of that size there. So it seems that three Smilodon specimens were present in this assortment. And what's really interesting is that the two jaws both have a very unusual tooth morphology. So they retain the third premolar. So premolar is one of the main tooth types in mammals. We have incisors, canines, premolars, and molars in our jaws. And in Smilodon, a third premolar in adults is it's a rare mutation. And we know that from this amazing sample at La Brea. So of the thousands of Smilodon specimens there, somewhere in the neighborhood of 2% have a third premolar in the adult dentition. So the fact that both of these jaws have this very unusual mutation is very suggestive evidence that these animals, were closely related. That's the sort of thing you might expect to see in, animals that share, an unusually large amount of their DNA. And so what the authors, Reynolds et al., have proposed is that, we were looking at two not quite adult. So the adult dentition has erupted, but they're not at full size. Is two subadult specimens, one adult specimen. And if they're all related, actually, these are probably siblings. So the argument is that these are, the siblings of potentially a mother Smilodon, which might be represented by the larger specimen there. And I mean, it's interesting both from sort of that's cute. They're, the babies, they still hang out sort of sense. But there are also like a number of sort of interesting scientific conclusions about what this tells us about life history in Smilodon. So again, looking at sort of the relative sizes, if these animals, they're quite large and they're already probably able to hunt. And yet the fact that they're still associated with an adult, with the conclusion that these authors make being that they're still being raised to a degree by their parents, suggests extremely protracted child rearing in Smilodon, more comparable to modern lions, which are sort of the only very social big cat, compared to most of the other most of the other extant big cats, and what we've thought was the case for a lot of the fossil ones as well. So there has been a debate over whether Smilodon was a social animal whether it was more solitary, basically whether it was more like a lion or a tiger, with evidence both ways. And these results suggest at least that there was evidence for sociality within family groups for long periods of time. Um, However, there is some tigerishness to these, what are sometimes called the saber-toothed tigers. The researchers also looked at growth rates in Smilodon, which we know from combination of data, both from looking at histology, but in mammals, you're not totally reliant on that because you can also age things pretty carefully by tooth eruption and degree of fusion of the limbs and things like that. And so they found that Smilodon was growing very rapidly at similar rates to modern tigers, but that it was also growing for a very long time, which is more similar to modern lions. So it's a combination of growth and rearing strategies, seemingly not quite like any of the modern big cats, but sort of a combination of many of them, indicating that Smilodon probably did have a fairly unique life history and probably had habits that they're not exactly comparable to any of the modern big cats, which is something that you sort of expect because it has these crazy giant fangs that isn't quite like anything today. But it's nice to have some confirmation of that from a broader types of data. And it's also, I think, it's just interesting to think that we can learn new things about an animal that has been one of the best known fossil organisms for 100 years or more. That there's always still more to discover about sort of these amazing creatures.
Yeah, that is really incredible. I'm so excited to see that they do have a softer side, even though they have those knife-like teeth that are so menacing. I will say my first thought when you said Saber Kitten was that somebody needs to make a band and call it Saber Kitten or make it like their social media handle or something. So yeah, I love that term. Where are the Saber Kittens? My first thought, in comparing these two cats, modern cats that are still around today, you talked about how their growth strategies were so different and how the saber-tooth cats seem to have like a mixture of the growth strategies where they're growing really fast, but they can also get growing for a long time, right? So to me, that sounds like it's a lot of pressure on a species. I mean, do we think that could have led to their extinction at all? Like this growth strategy that
Yeah, sure. So that's certainly this style of growth would have been energetically costly. Like it takes a lot of energetic investment to grow large and certainly to grow large quickly. And we know, so Smilodon went extinct roughly 10,000 years ago. Sort of the most recent Smilodon fossils have been radiocarbon dated between 10 and 11,000 years old. The absolute most recent actually may be some of the ones that were collected in downtown Nashville, Tennessee, at a pit there, and which is a pretty well known site that's actually now a bank. And I think the bank still has the fossils there. So if you're in Nashville, keep an eye out for Smilodon fossils in a bank. The first American. Anyway, so the Smilodon went extinct together at the same time with most of the megafauna. So there are, at least in North America, North and South America. So there is some variation in rate of extinction between the different continents. And the causes of that extinction are still debated. It's clear that climate change was related to it somehow. It seems to be the case that for a lot of these humans were also related, not Pleistocene peoples causing climate change themselves, but from overhunting. You have completely novel predator on the scene on these continents, and these prey animals like mastodons and giant ground sloth are just not able to keep up with human hunting. At least that's the argument.
Yeah, it's just incredible to think about that. Thousands of years ago, humans would have been as excellent as at hunting, and yeah. Anyway.
So whether whether the sort of greater energetic constraints on growth for Smilodon in particular pushed it over the edge is hard to say. I mean, you have lots of other animals going extinct at the same time, not all of which had such rapid growth. So I think it's, that may have been part of it, especially as their prey is being depleted, whether they're dying off due to changes in the ecosystems or just to humans hunting them, competing with them. But probably that was not the determining factor to their extinction.
Mm-hmm. And Anne has a great question. Did the males have larger canine teeth than the females? Larger saber teeth?
There's actually not really evidence for sexual dimorphism in Smilodon. So unlike like lions today, where you do get there's evidence. Well, we can see that the males have manes when we have sort of the whole animal there, but there also are skeletal characters that allow you to determine the sex of big cats. And it's been difficult to find similar things in a lot of fossil taxa. But it doesn't seem like the male and female Smilodons were all that different in shape. So it's not like, they had substantially longer canines or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. How would you know that you found, a male versus a female saber-tooth fossil?
Well, so a lot of mammals actually, so humans are rare exception. A lot of mammals do have an ossified, they have ossified genitals. So in cats have what's called the os penis, which is a bone that is in there. So if you have complete skeleton, you can be fairly confident if it is a male.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, no, it's a wild thing.
Mm-hmm.
And can be quite sizable in some things. Like the walrus baculum is a frightening natural history object. I'll just say that.
Okay. I will leave it at that. Yeah, okay, that's really cool. So okay. If I've learned anything from talking to you on Old News, it's that, we can often find a tooth or a jaw or, whole set of teeth and claim that something is a new species because that by itself has enough information to really tell us that. So, you mentioned that the saber-tooth siblings had that third premolar, and that's kind of an indication that they're related, right? That they're siblings. But why don't scientists believe, why aren't they toying with the idea that it could be another species altogether? Like, how do they know that it's still a saber-tooth?
Well, so those sorts of minor variations in tooth morphology, they do play a big role in mammal paleontology. So like most of the mammal fossil record is isolated teeth. And sometimes you have species that are differentiated on the basis of like one cusp difference. So it's a valid concern. But this is a case where just the richness of the sample size can be brought to bear. So we have so many Smilodon specimens from the tar pits, so many thousands of them, that and they're all from the same time interval. They're from the same site, from the same time.
You said they were like
we know living together.
2,000?
Yeah, over 2,000. I think and that's at the minimum number. So like there are many more bones than that. So, but it's based on number of individuals, or MNI is calculated based on overlapping elements. So what is the lowest number of individuals that could possibly produce all these bones? Mm-hmm. And so it's really easy if you have skulls. So, an animal can only have one skull.
Yeah.
But sometimes, like if you have two right arm bones, there have to be at least two animals there. So based on that, there's at least 2,000 individuals represented, and of that, all of them are very sort of morphologically conservative. That is to say, they all look the same, but there is variation at very low levels between them. So whether or not this one tooth is retained to adulthood, whether or not the sagittal crest, which is the part of the back of the skull where the jaw muscles attach, is a little higher or a little shorter. There are all sorts of little things that are typical of what we see in individual variation in modern animals. So, I mean, if you look at any wild animal today, there will be some variation in their shape. They're not all exactly the same. But so by comparisons to sort of that degree of variation in living things, and looking at the Smilodon fauna, you can say, okay, they all look basically the same. And admittedly, these are vague terms. There's a lot more quantitative, technical detail involved in actually determining it. But they all look more or less the same, but they have these little mutations here and there that are the same as what you see in living things and have been considered individual variations. So with that known from La Brea, we can then expand that to sort of the whole Smilodon range, including the site in Ecuador, and saying that, oh yeah, these have this one weird mutation that you don't see that much.
Gotcha. And Anne also wants to know if we have any intact Smilodon DNA.
So a lot of that, we actually do have DNA for a lot of Ice Age mammals now. And the saber cats have been relatively bad at producing it because they aren't part of this really cold weather fauna. So most of the animals that we have, like, mammoths, woolly rhinos, dire wolves, cave lions, cave bears that we have DNA from are things that are thawing out of like the permafrost in Siberia or up in Alaska. Which is better at preserving, it's preserving actual meat on these things and hair. So we don't have any, mummified or frozen Smilodon. They didn't live up there. As best as we know, they weren't directly associated with the ice sheets.
Wait, so the Ice Age was wrong?
Well, I mean, certain creative liberties were taken, to be sure.
Wow, what a shocker.
But we also, very dry preservational regimes are also good at preserving things like that. So we have mummified like ground sloths in caves, where there's DNA as well. But those are much more common in their environments than Smilodon is. Unfortunately, the tar pits where all these bones are becoming completely saturated with oil is very bad at preserving DNA. So it all gets denatured and messed up. It is possible to extract some proteins from them.
Is it destroyed like chemically from the oils, or is it heat, or all of the above?
Yeah, kind of all of the above. With that said, there are a few cases of the species of a closer related saber-tooth called Homotherium. So Smilodon is actually not the only saber-tooth that survived into the Pleistocene. There are a few other taxa that live elsewhere in the world. Homotherium is also living. It got into North America as well, but was more of a thing in sort of Eurasia. And there is some, and it also seems to have been in colder weather habitats. And there is some DNA from that. There's also some DNA potentially from caves, I think in Chile, that might be referable to Smilodon, but pretty scarce. We're not anywhere near, potentially sequencing the whole genome like we are for woolly mammoths, for instance.
Right. Or cloning.
Yeah.
You know how cats really love to chase stuff like laser pointers with a little red dot and bugs and stuff like that. Do we know if, things like the saber-toothed cats would have had that kind of behavior?
Well, I mean, they're fairly distantly related to modern domestic cats. With that said, a lot of the living cats, they have, they instinctively pounce on prey. Basically, all cats do. So it's certainly, not out of the question that some of these saber kittens would also be, as eager to go after a laser pointer as some of our domestic friends.
So it's time to travel back in time again, grab a laser pointer, and just find out if a very large saber-toothed cat will chase
It-
it around on the floor.
yeah, especially for the juveniles, a lot of how they learn to hunt is through play. I mean, you see that in things like lions today. Of the cubs will spend a lot of time like pouncing on other animals, on each other, even without necessarily when doing it to other animals, not necessarily killing them, but just more,
Yeah.
or sort of like practicing annoying them. Um, and
Mhm.
yeah, there's no reason to suspect that Smilodon and its allies wouldn't have been the same.
Mhm. I love that. And Jackson made a note that we're creating Jurassic World all over again.
Yeah,
Or Pleistocene World, right?
get a Pleistocene Park.
Yeah, there we go. You're full of good ideas, Christian. Love it. Well, Christian, do you have anything else to add before we go? I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, but we've got a few more minutes if you want to type those in.
Well, I mean, I just want to reiterate that there's like they're a very well studied fossil. Smilodon is one of the best. And but that doesn't mean we need to stop working on them. Like we just need to like give up and say, okay, that's it. We know everything.
You know everything.
We already know so little about every fossil species compared to most living species, or at least like most living mammalian species. At least there are probably literally millions of invertebrates, bacteria, fungi, and stuff that we have not even discovered yet on Earth. Um, but comparing to something like a lion or a tiger, where there have been thousands and thousands of scientific papers written over hundreds of years, looking at every aspect of their life in incredible detail, we have only the tiniest fraction of that knowledge for even as well understood a taxon as Smilodon. So even being able to drop that gap a little more and bring our knowledge of any fossil creature closer to like if it was alive today, I think is an amazing and wonderful thing. Um, and so yeah, should not be giving it up on the Ice Age taxa anytime soon.
Mhm. Jackson got bingo. Congratulations, Jackson.
Oh,
We're gonna have to
congrats.
come up with a bingo prize for those of you who play bingo. How do you feel about a signed headshot of Christian in the field with a big fossil? We'll think on that. But Christian, that made me think of another question for you.
Uh-huh.
What's the most surprising thing that you've ever discovered? Because you do know so much about so many things. Is there anything that really kind of rocked your world in paleontology?
Oh boy. Oh wow. There's a
And my saber kitten
there's
right
a
here.
living relative of Smilodon right there. Um, that's a difficult question to answer. There are weird behavioral things in modern animals that, especially recently, as we have a lot, you know, like in the past 10 years or so, as camera trapping has become very popular, and we get to see more animals sort of like in their natural state, without fear of humans being around, and get to see some of the behaviors that really are never observable otherwise,
Mhm.
um, that are pretty shocking, like the fact that sloths will go into outhouses and eat all the old toilet paper there and other gross stuff like that. um, so there's yeah, weird things like that, but there's just so many of them. It's difficult for me to like choose one particularly
Mhm.
amazing thing. When
Yeah.
you're a naturalist, when you're interested in the natural world, like every everything you see is potentially a source of wonder.
Mhm. Yeah, and we had a program earlier today, our natural sciences classroom, and someone mentioned ice worms. And I was like, are ice worms really a thing? I want them to be real because that would be amazing if
Hmm.
ice worms were real. Um, anyway, I don't know why I just thought of that. We did have one last question from the audience, that you said earlier that there seems to be a lot of potential uses of the huge canine teeth in saber-tooth tigers, cats. Are there any main, or most likely theories?
Yeah. Well, first I want to say, just to follow up on your previous statement, ice worms are real.
They are real?
Ice worms are a thing. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. See, now I'm amazed. This is rocking my world.
Uh, But as to the use of the sabers, so historically, sort of the main argument was that they were specialists on thick-skinned, large prey. Your mastodons, your giant ground sloths, your giant bison, and that they were making huge slashing bites either in the underbelly or along the flank, hopefully either hamstringing these animals or waiting for their guts to fall out or something like that. Um, there are still arguments in favor of that. There are some of the isotopic work on these saber-toothed cats have suggested that they were living in more forested areas, which generally don't have as gigantic of herbivorous mammals in there. So things more sort of in the deer size range than potentially like the mammoth size range. And so that in that case, maybe they were consuming somewhat smaller prey. But the idea that they're somehow slashing along the sides at the sort of the softer points in the anatomy is to my, as far as I know, still sort of the prevailing one. So maybe not a specialist on really thick-skinned giant things, but still basically making a big cut along the side that hopefully kills the animal very rapidly, and then probably animals can survive quite a while with very bad injuries. So maybe the saber cat would then be hunting it for a little while, or at least like tracking it, waiting for it to die of blood loss or whatever finally kills it in the end.
Tar pits, right?
Yeah, it's suffocation in the tar pit.
Really sad for animals that died thousands of years ago. All right. Well, everyone, we are out of time for today, but we've learned lots of new things. I'm definitely going to have to learn a lot about ice worms and potentially botflies. And of course, saber-tooth cats.
Where botflies coming from?
Someone in the chat typed in botflies.
Oh, okay.
Probably as an example, I imagine, of something that like kind of what is shocking.
Oh yeah, botflies. The concept is shocking.
Yeah.
And yeah, don't get them. Although it is, it's a mark of pride, I know, among neotropical biologists who work in the tropics, to have hosted a botfly to emergence, let's say.
Just sounds like they're throwing a botfly party.
Yep.
Hosting botflies. I can understand that line of thinking, although
Yeah.
I still don't want that.
It's a point of pride.
Yeah. All right. Well, everyone mark your calendars for February 9th, 1 p.m. That is our next episode of Old News. No idea what the topic will be. Make sure you register and you'll get an email possibly the morning of, possibly a little before the day before the program. And that email will give you the link to the program, the topic, so you can decide if it's something you're really interested in, or maybe you want to not watch it live, watch it later. And bingo sheets, bingo vocabulary terms, lots of fun stuff. So you can find that link on our website, on our YouTube channel, in the description of this YouTube video. Yeah, thank you all for joining us today. Thanks, Christian, as usual, for sharing.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thanks everybody. Stay safe out there.
Stay safe. Bye.